There we go. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this month's Azure User Group meeting. For those of you who showed up early, we did get over like 180 plus people registered for the meeting. And it's going to be interesting because the meetup subscription we have will only handle 100. So a lot of people are going to have to watch it in the recording. Okay, so just a brief, I'm going to only take about 5 minutes because we really do want to get Tim on and talk about the hot topic that he's got to cover with you. Excuse me. We'll talk briefly about the mission of the group, the history of the group, the meetings that we have, who the board of directors is, and sponsors and sponsorship opportunities. If you work for a company that wants to have 10, 15 minutes at the beginning of a meeting to talk about your company, we're open to accepting things like raffle prizes or gift certificates, whatever your company feels like giving up, and we can raffle off. We have a YouTube channel, which this is being recorded for, and it will be posted within the next couple of days. And we'll talk about tonight's meeting. So anyway, we're all about Microsoft. Excuse me. We're all about Microsoft Azure, both infrastructure, development, AI, as you can tell from tonight. We want to provide a forum for open discussion and informal networking among the members. I must admit that we were able to do that more when we met in person, but it's been a while since we met in person, okay? But it's relevant to folks, we think at all levels of management and the technical skills related to Azure. We were founded in 2013 with 4 members, and today that number is already out of date. We have almost 3,000 registered members now, and they're all over the place. They're worldwide. But tell your friends and coworkers about us. We can use some more members. We're actually in a race with the local .NET group to see who gets bigger. So, tell everyone about us. Currently, we're meeting online via Zoom. That's our schedule. If you're interested in a topic for future meetings, let us know. I always give preference to folks who attend the meetings to pick the next topic. So just make suggestions, and we can usually, because of the coverage we have, we can usually line up the speaker on almost any topic related to Azure. Okay. And also, by the way, if you're interested in giving a talk, let us know that too. We actually have openings starting from next month. Okay, this is our board of directors. I'm the founder and president. I'm an Azure solutions architect with Atos Syntel, a large multinational consulting company. And Roger Dahlman was a co-founder when we started the group and a vice president of the group. And he's an enterprise architect with Deloitte. Tim Warner, who's also our speaker tonight, is a Microsoft Azure documentation specialist. He's on the board. And I'm sure there isn't anybody around here who doesn't know who Tim Warner is, because he's done a lot of work creating Pluralsight courses and writing books. And he's very active in the online community. And Jack Hagler is he's a VACO Technology Associate Director, and he does recruiting. So they actually pay for our Zoom subscription. So, it's good advertising for them, but I think that, he's a good guy and has been doing this ever since 2013, by the way. And when we met in person, he used to provide refreshments. Sponsors, Microsoft pays for our meetup dues. I can remember years ago when I used to have to pay for those dues out of my own pocket. VACO provides our Zoom subscription. And we're also affiliated with the Greater Nashville Technology Council, Greater Nashville Technology Group Leadership Council, and the Greater National Technology Group. And we recently started up with a sponsorship with A Cloud Guru. We're a training sponsor. Before you ask, we haven't gotten any special arrangements or deals yet, but we are working on some. So maybe they'll get us some discounts over and above their existing discounts. It's something we're working on. This is what I mentioned before. If you want to have 10 or 15 minutes at the beginning of a meeting to promote your company or product or services, contact Roger Dahlman at dahlman.net. Okay. And we're basically open to anything we can give away to our members, okay? This is our YouTube channel. And as you can see, we already have a ton of videos out there. And this video will be added to it, within a day or two. Like I said, we had openings from April. Oops. Yes, from April, right? I did update it. Okay, from April and beyond. And again, if you want to present a topic, don't feel shy. I mean, don't feel that you have to do a professional presentation. If you're passionate about something and you want to present to the group, let us know. We'll work something out. Okay. And with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to our presenter tonight, Tim Warner, who's going to talk about ChatGPT and GitHub Copilot. Tim, do you want to take it away?
Yes, sir. Yeah, let me get over to my screen share here. Hang on just a second. Screen share. And if you could confirm, Bill, that you see my PowerPoint. Okay, thanks. All right. Well, hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us for this session. ChatGPT and GitHub Copilot Quick Start. As Bill said, we're recording this and we'll post the video on YouTube, maybe as early as tomorrow. We'll see. All right. So what do we got in store for us? Overview. What do I have prepared for you? Well, my goals as your presenter tonight is I'd really like you to leave this session having a good conversational familiarity and the beginnings of hands-on proficiency with two key OpenAI models, ChatGPT, the chat intelligent chatbot, and GitHub Copilot that actually uses another model called Codex. You'll understand that difference by the end of tonight as well. Like I said, I want you to get productive with ChatGPT so you'll understand how to access it in a number of different ways. Is it free? Does it cost money? How could this service that's in the news all over the place now help me in my work, in my business? How can it help with my career development? How could it help me personally, really? Because I read in the news that there's some people who, believe it or not, are doing psychotherapy with ChatGPT and getting help according to what they report. I also, on the other side of things, want you to get comfortable and productive with GitHub Copilot, which is all about code generation. And it's already integral to my workflow and my work. It's fantastic stuff. Okay, session materials. This is the link that you want for that, timw.info ChatGPT, hopefully easy to remember. What that link will take you to is a GitHub gist that I put together where I've done two things. One, I've assembled relevant links, so you don't have to make notes if you don't want to. And two, I've given you a link to this PowerPoint deck if you feel that it'll be useful to you. So I'll give you this link again at the end. Bill, if you wouldn't mind putting this link in the chat, I would really appreciate that, actually, just to have it as far and wide as possible. timw.info ChatGPT. And let me switch over, actually, to my browser just to show you what that looks like. So what I've got here in that gist is some contact info if you want to get in touch outside of this session. As I mentioned, I've got a link to the PowerPoint deck that I'm showing. And then I've broken it into categories here. We're going to start broad and then get more granular. OpenAI relevant links, ChatGPT relevant links, and GitHub Copilot. Pretty lean and mean. That's how I like to roll. So let's come back to the slides and let's continue. So very little preliminary information. I want this to be hands-on and practical. When the crowd gets us to a certain size, it becomes cumbersome, I found, to unmute mics. So as I present for the next 40 minutes, 45 minutes, whatever, pop your questions into the chat, would you? And periodically I'll pause and I'll ask Bill if there's any questions that he's identified in the chat and I can address them then. How's that sound? And I'll definitely leave room at the end of the session, and I'm even willing to stay after the session. I don't have any meeting butting up against this one. My wife and daughter are out of town, so it's just my dogs, my cats, and me here. So introducing OpenAI, ChatGPT, and GitHub Copilot. Let's take care of the relevant vocabulary and convert technobabble into human readable info. So what we've got, first of all, OpenAI is a nonprofit research. Well, I don't think they're nonprofit. Let me step back. They're making a lot of money. So let me just say OpenAI is a research organization that's committed to what's called responsible artificial intelligence, creating safe and beneficial AI for humanity. So they're the brains behind these machine learning models that are causing so much buzz. ChatGPT is perhaps their most famous model. It's called an LLM, a large language model that understands and generates natural language text. So you can consider it one of the world's most intelligent chatbots. That would be an elevator pitch way to describe ChatGPT. Couple more vocab terms. GitHub Copilot is an AI-powered pair programmer. That's how the marketing literature defines it, that will suggest code snippets based on the context as you work, and as you type, you're going to get dynamic suggestions, which can accomplish a couple important things. If you're a developer or an IT ops, DevOps person, and you're generating whatever it is that you're doing, GitHub Copilot can save you time and save you the work of scaffolding functions and class definitions. You'll see more when we get involved. It's pretty cool. And then, I have to say this as a Microsoft specialist, Azure OpenAI is how Microsoft is integrating these OpenAI models into the Azure ecosystem specifically. And I don't think I've got time to do a demo of Azure OpenAI, so I just captured some screenshots from the Azure portal. First, though, one more bit of theory. Now, I want this session to be approachable to literally anybody, not somebody who has a PhD in data science, because they wouldn't be here anyway, I don't think. So I want to just explain, what are we talking about with AI and machine learning? AI, in my understanding, the way I would define it, is a system in which we have a piece of software that is able to mimic aspects of human intelligence, recall, learning, making new decisions with new inputs based on learnings of past events, that kind of stuff. And the specific technique that's used most commonly with this stuff is called machine learning, or ML. ChatGPT is called a generative or predictive AI model. That's because it's auto-generating a response to a prompt that you give it. And it's making predictions. For example, GitHub Copilot sees that you're doing PowerShell and it detects that you're trying to create, say, a new Active Directory user account. It'll see that and make a good guess and show you all the rest of the code. And oftentimes you'll get multiple suggestions to choose from, or you could just dismiss them all. But ultimately, I want you to understand behind the curtain just a little smidge of how you train a machine learning model, because it's not rocket science as such. Check it out. I know I'm simplifying, but on one hand, you've got your source data, and that there's a whole science to preparing data in model training, but I can't even imagine the volume of data that comes in to train ChatGPT, for example. I know that the Codex model that's used for the code generation has historically used all of the open source GitHub code, not the private repos, but public code. And you can opt out, by the way. If you have public GitHub repos, go into your repository settings, and there is a tick box that you can choose where you can say, I don't want the Codex model to look at my stuff and incorporate it in its model. So you have a large volume of data that you've cleansed and sanitized to a degree and prepared. On the other hand, you have a library of statistical algorithms, basically statistical formulas. You put those together using massively parallel compute to start testing out these different functions against the source data. And it boggles the mind when you think of the scope of large volumes of data with all these statistical algorithms. And the idea of model training is to find the correct algorithm that most accurately gives you prediction results, in this case, generative predictive results. And so you would want to train and keep on training the model. ChatGPT was trained most extensively up to September 2021. So you'll find right in the ChatGPT literature. In fact, you'll see tonight, if we ask ChatGPT a question about a current event, chances are it's going to come back with some boilerplate text saying, as of my limit of September 2021. I suspect that's already changing, but it's kind of annoying now because a lot has happened in the world. I think you'd agree between September 2021 and now. All right, so let's take another view in the OpenAI product catalog. They've got a number of these models. We're going to drill in on just ChatGPT and Codex, but there's a couple other ones as well. The actual model underneath ChatGPT, the large language model, is called GPT. It's generative something. I don't remember the acronym. And OpenAI just announced the release of version 4 the other day. That's the latest and greatest model. And I've heard stories that 4 is able to, based on text input, give you graphics back. It can already do that with DALL-E, but it can actually give you music and other types of responses besides just text. So I'm really excited personally to dive more into GPT-4. 3 has been the latest version historically over the recent terms. All right. Codex is a model specifically for code generation. Now, where things get fuzzy here is that we can absolutely have ChatGPT generate code. So my question is, there must be some bleed over from Codex into GPT. And I've actually asked ChatGPT that question, and it gives me a very sketchy type answer. It's proprietary, really. We have to understand that OpenAI is hanging on to this technology for dear life because it's so valuable. And Microsoft has invested something like $10 billion in the company. So admittedly, there's some business motivation going on there as well that we need to be aware of, just in the name of honesty. DALL-E is a cool project that my daughter Zoe turned me on to several months ago, where you can provide a text prompt, generate an oil painting of a goldfish riding a unicycle. I mean, it doesn't matter how crazy your image is, and it'll generate a number of graphics based on your input. It's a very cool algorithm, very cool model. All right, ChatGPT integrations. Where we're going to start is going to the canonical chat front end that OpenAI publishes. It's chat.openai.com. There's also an underlying REST API that you can use to integrate ChatGPT into your own line of business applications. That's a pretty big deal. Bing, or the new Bing as it's called, ChatGPT, in fact, GPT-4 is in Bing, so it's using the latest version of that model. As you can expect, given Microsoft's huge investment in OpenAI, Microsoft is integrating these OpenAI models into all their products, seemingly. What I'm particularly excited about is in Teams, there's going to be a premium paid tier. Again, show me the money, right? But the ChatGPT integration will do stuff like automatically summarize meetings. If you're in meetings half the day, imagine how convenient it would be, especially if you need to miss one, to get a detailed transcript of who said what when in the meeting, and it can actually summarize the themes of the meeting. I mean, the potentials here are pretty darn exciting. Lots of third parties, software as a service vendors like Salesforce are integrating GPT into their platform. And then if you go out to GitHub and you do a search for any of these models, you're going to find lots of third-party developers, just individuals, as well as companies that are innovating. It's really an exciting time. This is not a fad. This is not one of those flash in the pan things. This feels like it felt back in the early 90s when the World Wide Web started. I remember I was in college at the time. And when Wikipedia first started, I'm like, whoa, there's really something to this. I'm here on the cusp of a very big thing technology-wise. I think that this is the same thing. So I'm especially glad that you're all here tonight, because we're on the front end of something that's going to be with us for a long, long time. Going a little bit too heavy with the theory here, but there's some points that you really need to understand. ChatGPT is free to use. You can go to chat.openai.com, sign in with a Gmail account or a Microsoft account, but you may have a hard time signing in. It's heavily throttled. If you're willing to buck up $20 USD per month, you can get ChatGPT Plus, which gives you priority access. course, it's worth it for me. And I've never been blacked out once. I lost some, it really ticked me off, honestly. What put me over into doing Plus was I was doing some work several weeks ago that had a dependency on ChatGPT, and I couldn't get in. I was locked out due to the traffic, and it was a showstopper. It really ticked me off. And I haven't had a single lockout. I understand you still could get throttled or locked out with Plus, but that hasn't been my experience yet. The API does cost money. So if you wanted to get an API key and start accessing ChatGPT in your own line of business apps, in US dollars, it looks like it's 2/1000th of a penny per 1,000 tokens. A token is a unit, a payment unit, I guess we could look at it in ChatGPT. It doesn't necessarily correlate to a word, but it might. It's kind of complicated, unfortunately. The good news is that there's some tokenizer websites where you can submit text and it'll spit back the number of tokens that it's consuming. In fact, in the file, in that markdown file that I told you about, let me jump over there real quick, the one that I linked to. If I go under OpenAI, a GPT token calculator. So there's a few online resources that can help you in terms of cost forecasting and that stuff, but that's how you pay for your requests, by these word fragments called tokens. Under the hood within ChatGPT, you already know it uses the GPT-3 or GPT-4 model, but then there are submodels below those even that are specialized. There's the smallest one is called Babbage. That's the smallest, fastest model. It's also the least expensive to use. Ada is domain specific, like industry specific, and we don't have the time or scope to get in there. The good place where I would recommend you go for docs is directly with OpenAI. Let me again come back to Bing. It would be the OpenAI docs page, platform.openai.com. There's not a lot of docs there yet, but what they have is pretty good. You'll come away with a nice supplement of what we're doing here for sure. Now, let me try to hide this panel because it's getting in my way. And as promised, let's dive in. Let's get into the good stuff here. So I've gone to chat.openai.com and I've signed in. Now what happens, what does it look like if you're not signed in? Let me open an in private window and go to chat.openai.com. Like I said, you have to sign in, authenticate with either a Google or a Microsoft account, and you can use it for free as long as you get in, as I said before. Sign up would allow you to sign up for Plus, which you can do at any time. And as you can see, I've got my Plus banner here. The free interface looks essentially the same as the Plus interface, so we're not missing anything as far as that goes. Over on the left-hand navigation bar, this is going to show a history of all of our prompts that we submit to ChatGPT. We can clear out that history if we want to over time. There's light and dark mode, just some standard links down here. Now, this is important up here. You can, when you're a Plus subscriber, you can access the most advanced latest model, GPT-4, but my understanding is that the free tier doesn't have GPT-4 in it. And so 4, like I said, is supposedly a really big advancement. Notice that the speed in the little icons here is low. It's pretty slow compared to GPT-3, the default. As you can see, the default is super fast. So there's a balance, as you can see, between reasoning power, speed, and conciseness. So let me stay on GPT 3.5. How do we interact with this? This is just a chat front end. You can build your own chat front end and use the API. I just want to keep repeating some key points in case you missed it the first time. The way that you program, and I put program in air quotes, ChatGPT is how you do your prompt. In fact, there are people making good money now as their full-time careers as what are called prompt engineers. So there's a burgeoning field of study that sprung from this GPT model called prompt engineering. It's all in being as discrete. You can be verbose, but you want to be as granular as possible in what you need. Well, let me think of a use case off the top of my head. What if we were a new Azure solutions architect and we were helping a company that had a mean stack application and they're wondering what options are available in Azure? So we could just say in natural language, my customer has a mean stack web application, if I can spell. You don't need to spell really well. It corrects pretty well. That they want to run in Azure. Recommend. You are an Azure solutions architect. Tell me your suggestions as to options and relative costs. So what you want to do is speak to the chatbot like you would speak to a consultant that you were working with. My wife and daughter, who I mentioned earlier, are better now. I trained them. But when we first got Amazon Echo at home and they started interacting with I don't want to say the name because there's one right over there, but they would be like, what is the current temperature? Like you're a robot. I was like, no, speak naturally. This is all about natural language processing and natural language, recognition. So as you can see, it's giving us some suggestions here, and I would agree with that. App service, perhaps virtual machines, AKS, so on and so forth. Now, I had mentioned that the model has been trained primarily, the bulk of its work was prior to September 2021. So if we asked a question about something more recent, like think of something, say in the Microsoft ecosystem that's much more recent, like Purview, for instance, that was after September 2021. Tell me, or we could even do better, compare Azure Purview to analogous AWS services. Why does it recognize Purview? And it's giving us, in a very fast way, detailed responses here. Now, these detailed responses are not plagiarized from existing docs. It's not like ChatGPT is going to AWS, scraping, and then pasting. This is original text. Now, we could have a discussion about what this means for plagiarism. I mean, my daughter's in middle school, so I'm actually facing this right now as a parent. But this is, in fact, original text that's synthesized based on the model's prior learnings. Now, even though Purview came out after 2021, I submit to you that you can ask questions about Microsoft stuff right up till 2023. Let me just say, which Azure services went GA in the fall of 2022? Oh, I'm surprised. Because what I was doing with kind of a wink and a smirk is that I found that when you ask about Microsoft stuff, you can generally get some pretty current information, and it would make sense economically given Microsoft's huge investment and partnership with OpenAI. But check this out here. It does mention, it's giving you the boilerplate text about September 2021. Interesting. What about code generation? Yes, absolutely. Let me see. Generate a PowerShell script that installs IIS web server and populates C web content with a sample website. I don't know, I'm just coming up with this stuff off the top of my head. As I mentioned, although GPT is a language model and not a code generation model, it's happy to do code generation. Now, this brings up some important points, doesn't it? I remember, who was it? Ronald Reagan, the US president in the 80s, who said, trust but verify. I think that's totally relevant here in this discussion. So it's given us, although it's marking the code box incorrectly as PHP, I would agree that we would need this command to install IIS. Here we're checking if the content directory C web content is valid, and if not, we're going to create it. So this looks solid. But the idea is we don't want to do the Stack Overflow thing where we're just doing a direct copy, paste, run, and then go have lunch. We want to do a little bit of vetting here because it is possible for the model to give incorrect information. And unfortunately, when you're on the plus tier, you don't get the when you're in the free tier. You probably have seen it tonight if you've signed in to chatopenai.com. There's like a disclaimer. And on the right-hand column, it gives you some limitations of ChatGPT. And one of them is that it can give incorrect information. One of my colleagues identified some pretty scary stuff where he was asking ChatGPT for technical book references, and ChatGPT was happy to give these bibliographies, and they referred to non-existent papers and books. It's like, whoa. So again, this isn't just an infallible guru. It can be enormously helpful for research, for code generation, and honestly, it can help with personal stuff, with school stuff. Check this out. I am resigning from my position at Microsoft on April 15th. Write a polite but kind resignation letter expressing gratitude. Just something like that. So in other words, you can throw just about anything, technical or non-technical, at ChatGPT, and it is so wide and broad because it's been trained on pretty much the world's literature. So it can generate letters, form letters, and that kind of stuff. Let's talk a little bit more about prompt engineering specifically. Let me go back to the exercise files. And I've got a link here to this awesome ChatGPT prompts. So what you really want to focus on, in my opinion, after you get past the initial just getting comfortable conversing with ChatGPT, is you want to start crafting high impact prompts that are more specific. And I've heard it described as the who, what, when, where, how. So you want to literally tell what role you want the AI to be, and you want to tell them what your role is and what you want to accomplish. For instance, maybe you're preparing for a technical interview. We could do something like, let me go back to where we were. And by the way, notice that it's maintaining my session history over here, and it's all tracked up here. And I can come back tomorrow unless I delete this conversation, and it'll still be here. It'll persist in this list. There is a token limit. I think it's 2,048 tokens is the overall limit for ChatGPT-3, and that accounts for the text that you submit as your prompt, as well as the text that comes back. So whereas you want to be verbose in your prompt, don't give it the works of Shakespeare, because then the response is going to be tiny. Now, I understand that OpenAI has dramatically expanded the token limits with GPT-4, where you can submit much more verbose prompts. And I've noticed in my testing that some of the responses that come back from GPT-4 are very substantial compared to GPT-3. Another neat thing about this session history is that you can refer, and it will refer to previous topics within this session history. Now, when you're on the free tier, it'll eventually say you need to start a new conversation. Actually, is that true? It may do unlimited even at the free tier, but it's been a long time since I was on the free tier. If you're over at Bing using the ChatGPT and Bing, that definitely will force you to dump your session history after just a short number of prompts, unfortunately. Just one of those things. I'm sure that Microsoft will expand that over time, but the history can be really useful because now we can say, for example, it gave us this PowerShell script. Let's see, we can have it modify it and say, modify the above script so that we use a Node, well, I'll just say .NET Core application and see if that changes. So we can have it refactor these responses, which it's doing here. So it's doing some .NET work in addition to, actually, it looks like it's creating a sample .NET Core application, putting it into the directory. So we're able to go back and forth throughout this session history, which is really powerful. Now, if you do want to clear your history, you've got this control over here, you confirm, and it goes away, and we can start up a new chat. So let me switch over to GPT-4, and let me just give a quick off the top of my head example. Like I said earlier, let's say that you're preparing for a tech interview with AWS. So you are an AWS technical hiring manager. I am a candidate for a cloud solutions architect position. Give me a challenging tech interview question. Now I could be more specific and give it on a specific subject. But the idea here is that we can go on and continue a threaded conversation with this AI-based AWS technical hiring manager. We can give a response to a question and have it evaluate that response. It's really amazing. So as I was saying, this GitHub project I find pretty interesting called Awesome ChatGPT Prompts. And there's a number of examples in here. Some are kind of funny more than useful. But there was one in particular I was playing with that I thought was cool. We can do language translations. We can instruct the AI to act as a Linux terminal and respond to shell commands. There's the interviewer example. There's one that travel guide, plagiarism checker. Yeah, I like this one because I'm a big literature nerd. So let me copy this one out here and go back to where we were. Let me open up a new chat session and let's put it on GPT-4. So I'm going to paste this prompt in. So I want you to act like a character from a series. So this could be a book or a movie character. Let me think off the top of my head of an example. This is really highbrow and ridiculous, but I am that kind of nerd. Let's say I want you to act like Iago from the Shakespeare play Othello. I want you to respond like Iago using the name, manner, and vocabulary that Iago would use. Do not write any explanations, only answer like. So you see how specific we are? You must know all the knowledge of, I probably should have just done a VS Code find and replace. My first sentence is hi, Iago. So it's kind of funny. So I extended this conversation the other night pretty far, just natural language. Why do you hate Othello so much? Now, you might have seen in the news references to the DAN project, D-A-N. That is a form of prompt engineering. It's controversial because what it attempts to do is by structuring this particular kind of prompt, you can force the GPT model to act outside of its good behavior because there's a lot of the responsible AI stuff in here. If you are asking it for how to make a explosive or something, it's not going to answer those things. So the DAN project is a way, how can we try to hack using prompt engineering to get the AI to bypass all of its filters and act really nasty? And I think it's interesting because we do want to test the limits of these technologies. Microsoft is fully aware of the DAN project and all of its variables, its variations, by the way. Bill, any questions in the queue that I can address at this point before we move on?
Nope, just a comment by Doug that people should take a look at Satya's announcement today on AI. He said it was a really good announcement, but no questions.
Okay. Now, you might have also seen in the news that the Microsoft Bing search engine now has ChatGPT integration. I don't know offhand whether it's public now or if it's still something that you need to opt into. I guess we could ask it directly. Is the new Bing available to the general public? It's in limited preview. Okay, how can I sign up? So what we're seeing is the fruits of this GPT-4 integration. You saw, for example, that the Bing page just had a single prompt where you could use natural language to type your search string. And the results here at first blush look just like a search results page you would normally get. You get a featured or top result, but notice that there's some supplemental questions that are very relevant. They're coming from GPT. You might think, okay, the new Bing is in limited preview, so that must mean I have to get on a wait list. How can I sign up for the wait list? And notice what happens. It brings down a chat page, and you can always hit that chat directly when you're on the new Bing by using this pointing. You can see on the toolbar in my Edge browser. You can just go into the B to start a chat. But within the search engine, notice here, it's now going further. Now, how is this different from using chat.openai.com? Well, it's free, number one, there's not a plus tier. Two, it's not going to maintain anywhere near as long of a session history. Number three, it's much more moderated. And I've never tried any of the Dan stuff with it, but I have a feeling that it's immune to that kind of stuff. That's just my thought. Number four, you're going to find that the responses are much more, what's the term, justified. For example, every sentence that comes back is footnoted. So you can see what relevant link that particular sentence came from. You see what I'm saying? And so now we can continue on a new topic, or we can just continue to ask, does the new Bing cost money? And just continue. And like I said, we're going to hit a limit where we're going to have to use this broom to create a new topic. I think because, it costs money on the back end of things. This model's running in the Azure cloud. And to maintain that session state does have overhead to it, as you can expect. Bill and I were talking before the session started. Another thing I'd recommend you do is install the Bing app on your iPhone or your Android device. I actually use Bing and this Bing chat feature more on my phone than I do in a full desktop browser. I'm just so proficient with Google, it's hard for me to not use it during the day. But when I'm out and about, it's pretty convenient because the Bing app on my phone, you can, if you're driving, you could just use your mic and ask a question. You don't have to use text input. It's very convenient indeed. And I also want you to see that when you start a new topic or a new chat, you can specify your conversation style. Let me scroll up right here. And basically you're choosing whether you want GPT to be more creative and imaginative. Is it more for fun? Or what I normally set it on is more precise, where the responses are as factual and concise as possible. And then there's a midpoint, balanced. So this gives you some control, and I would imagine there's going to be a latency difference. Precise is a bit slower than creative, actually. I've actually noticed that. But this is, in a nutshell, the new Bing. So you've got, if you go to bing.com, as long as you're signed in and you're approved to use the new Bing, you do your standard search, and you can either start chatting directly from the first search result, you can keep scrolling to do your old school searches, or you could keep scrolling up, and then it'll bring down a separate chat panel where you can actually initiate a back and forth chat with the GPT-4 model. Pretty sweet, huh? Now, without further ado, let me jump over to VS Code because I want to show you GitHub Copilot. Now, the name would lead you to think this is a GitHub technology. It is. How do you use it? Does it cost money? How do you sign up for it? Well, I've got a link in the course notes again. Let me go back to my browser. If we go down to GitHub Copilot, I've got a link to the product page, the documentation, and the Visual Studio extension. Here's the dealio. GitHub Copilot is a paid service, but they have a generous 60-day free trial. And I think they'll even double that. When you get to the end of your trial, there's an option to extend your trial for another 60 days. I have a recollection that I've seen that in the last week or so. If you do decide to pay for it, at last check, I think it was 20 bucks USD per month. And what does that give you? It gives you the ability to use Copilot in your favorite IDE. Now, I say your favorite, it reminds me of that old aphorism of Henry Ford, who said, supposedly, that we'll make a car for you any color under the rainbow as long as you like black. Well, similarly, with GitHub Copilot, it supports Visual Studio, it supports Visual Studio Code, and it supports, I believe, you can read in the docs, I think IntelliJ, there may be a couple others, but I'm going to demo this in VS Code. Okay, so let's say that you've gone to the sign up page. You're going to need a GitHub account. It doesn't have to be a paid account. It can be a free GitHub account. You could be working with public or private repos. This is going to be specific to your GitHub ID, so that doesn't matter. You've signed up. How do you get it running in VS Code? Well, what you want to do, it's very easy, is just open the extensions gallery and look for, wait for it, GitHub Copilot, the official extension. Now you're going to see that there's a lot of third-party developers who are also building on Copilot in various ways, but all I use is the official GitHub Copilot extension, as you can see here. A little bit confused. Why am I getting an install link down here? Is this a preview version? Oh, nightly. So it looks like if you want to do testing, just like you can get nightly builds of VS Codes, it looks like you can do a nightly build of GitHub Copilot. Interesting. Okay. But I'm using the generally available one. Once you've got the extension installed, you'll get prompted to sign in to your GitHub account. And that's all you need to do, because your GitHub account will have your registration to the Copilot service. And so that's all you need. So at this point, we're ready to fly. We could, if we want to, see if there's any settings, but there's really not a whole lot of settings here. If I do a search for GitHub, we've got collecting diagnostics, sending feedback, open GitHub Copilot, which is just opening up another editor pane. There's really nothing to it. It's just going to run. How do we know it's running? Well, if you look in the lower right of my VS Code, you see this Copilot icon? It's an on-off toggle. And so you can deactivate it by clicking that and confirming. You can turn it back on. I want to leave it on. When it's turned off or deactivated, it's very obvious because the icon has a very strong, I think it's red, I'm colorblind, but it has a strong border around it to let you know it's turned off, because you may not want it on all the time. Two main ways that you interact with GitHub Copilot. One is while you're typing. Just wait for different suggestions to pop up. Let me show you what I mean. So I'm in a project folder here, and I created a PS1, a PowerShell script called GitHub Copilot.ps1. And just as you start to type, now, one issue with PowerShell in particular in VS Code is that sometimes the extension, the PowerShell extension, can get in the way and step on what Copilot is trying to do. So in this case, I'm getting IntelliSense here that's coming from the extension as opposed to Copilot, which can be a little bit annoying. However, notice that if I just don't do anything, I type the command and then I hover and wait, I get this gray, I think this is gray, text. Now I can do a few different things now. I can use the tab key to accept this suggestion. I can use the escape key to dismiss it and keep on typing. I can accept a word at a time by using control with the right arrow or left arrow keys. And if there's more than one suggestion, I can toggle them. I always forget what the keyboard shortcut is. I think it's control left square bracket and control right square bracket. You also see that the GitHub Copilot extension gives you a hover, and this is what I use. I love this hover menu. It looks like there's only one suggestion here, unfortunately, and I can accept or whatever. I'm going to choose accept, and there it fills it out. So for things like you're doing some PowerShell and you're like, what was the name of those parameters again? This can be so helpful as you type, you know, new AZ user hover. Is that even a command? How about new AZ. Maybe you're doing an Azure Active Directory group. You see? So here we get some IntelliSense, and there's 3 proposed solutions here that have been auto-generated. And again, you can use, it looks like the tooltip says that it's Alt closing square bracket to jump to the next one, and it would be Alt open bracket to go to the previous one. So you can just jog through, and the idea is that if you like one, you can hit tab, but I can also hit escape if I don't want to use it, and then it'll just happily go on its way. See? So this actually works no matter what kind of stuff you're doing in VS Code. I found that out by surprise the other day. I was writing a blog article for a company that I contract with, and I was just, I don't know why I was in code, to be honest with you. Let me just say blog.txt. So it was just a plain text file. And I was writing something like, you know, Azure AD is a pause. check it out. So this speaks to the fact that although GitHub Copilot is supposed to be using Codex, which in turn is a code generator, it's happy to give you text. So I've found when you're doing comments in your scripts, this can help writing Git good summaries, Git commit messages. If you need to do a report on something you're doing, consider using GitHub Copilot. You know, it's pretty amazing, as you can see here. So I can accept this and just helps your employees sign in and access resources in, it's not actually giving me something, in a number of pause. Anyway, check it out. And this is coming from the model's history, how it's been trained. And this is where we get into a gray area again, like I said earlier about plagiarism. This is not just a copy and paste snippet from some blog post out in the world. This is an original piece of work that's been synthesized from existing sources. Now, I'm not going to claim this as my own text, and that's what I would always recommend others to do as well. All right, so another nice way to use GitHub Copilot is in an exploratory way. Actually, I want to give one more example of live code. So I'm not a C# developer, so I'm not going to be much help on that. The main language that GitHub Copilot and the Codex model were trained on is Python. You're going to get the best code of all with Python, because that was simply the majority of how the model was trained. But it can do a good number of other languages. I've seen it do a lot of good JavaScript, for example. I use PowerShell, I use Azure CLI. It can handle all of that really well. I do bash scripting and WinBatch scripting. It can do that. So it's pretty flexible as far as languages go. So if you open up a class definition or a function definition here, like new Azure Active Directory group, as soon as I open up the brackets, I can pause my mouse. Sometimes it doesn't catch right off the bat. Let me try that again. Whoops. What I'm trying to get it to do is actually open up a full function, because it will do that as well. So whatever it is that you're doing, okay, there we go. So it looks like we've got at least one. I'm just going to accept it. And we want to come back to that notion of trust but verify. I mean, this is a huge number of parameters. I don't know if that would be necessary. And then it's creating, it looks like this is not actually complete. We would want to take this object and splat it in another command. Let's see. So where would we put that? Let's see. So if we come after here, let's pause for a minute and see if it gives us the rest of the code. So this speaks to the imperfection of the model, that it can give you a giant head start. It can help you learn new programming and scripting languages. It can give you ideas of different ways to solve problems that you might not have been aware of. But you always want to do the trust but verify. It may not be perfect. You may need to refactor a bit. Like in this case, this looks like an incomplete proposed function, and it's got, in my opinion, way too many parameters anyway. All right, so as I was originally fixing to say, another thing we can do is comment-based exploration with GitHub Copilot. This, again, can be useful if you have no idea what you're doing, let's say, with a particular language or a situation, and you just want to use a natural language prompt. What you can do is use line comment syntax. So if I was in a C# file, I would use double forward slashes. Is that right? I think that's right. With PowerShell, a line comment is a £. So I would say, create a PowerShell script that deploys an Azure Key Vault. What do we do from here? I like to do Control-Enter. So you put your line comment, give a natural language prompt being as discrete and descriptive as possible. Control-Enter. And as you can see, Copilot will synthesize up to 10 solutions for you, and it hides duplicates. And so our idea here is that we can step through here in this first one. Sometimes you're going to see garbage, honestly, but you might find some wheat within the chaff somewhere. I'm seeing a lot of garbage, actually. It's not a really good example. But the idea is you can find the solution that you want to use as your base and hit accept solution, and it just copies it over into your active file. That was kind of create a, let's try something a little different. Create an Azure ARM template that deploys an Azure Key Vault with one secret, one certificate, and one encryption key. Wonder how it'll handle that. Control Enter. It's giving me some linkage that could be helpful, but this is, I'm not sure exactly what's going on here. Now, admittedly, it's only done 3 of 10. I probably should not be so impatient. I should just kick back and we can let it do its work, because we've asked it to do something fairly significant, I think. So why don't we do that actually? While we're waiting for that, let me come back and sweep up the shavings with you in the PowerPoint and see if there's anything that we missed. Like I said, prompt engineering is really the secret sauce to being super effective with these OpenAI models. I already mentioned all this stuff. Okay, limitations, I think I mentioned all this stuff as well about the September 2021 limit. Trust but verify, okay, I've mentioned all that. Now, the OpenAI service, like I mentioned at the beginning of the session, is how Microsoft is formally integrating the OpenAI models for customer use. Are you familiar with the Azure Cognitive Services? The cognitive services are pre-built models that are really special purpose. Like there's a model that can do language translation. You can throw text in language A and have it give you that same language in languages B, C, and D. So the COG services are these special purpose pre-trained models that you can easily integrate in your applications. Microsoft sees these OpenAI models like DALL-E, ChatGPT, GPT, Codex as fitting in the COG services family. So what you do is you create an instance of the Azure OpenAI service, and long story short, you can deploy n number of instances of GPT-4, let's say. And what's compelling to me, I don't know a whole lot about this. We're almost at the border of my knowledge of this right now, as a matter of fact. But this, I think, is going to answer the question. Okay, we're a business. We see that we can really do some great stuff with these models, image generation, text generation, code generation. We're uncomfortable bringing in data from the world. We want to use that technology using our private knowledge bases, our private internal data stores. That, I think, is what's going on with Azure OpenAI service. So you've got your own private instances of these models that your developers can then tap into. So you can leverage the huge intelligence there of text, language, image generation in a private, secure way. Pretty cool, isn't it? So that, again, is called the OpenAI service. I think it looks like it's in public preview. These screenshots are not very useful. They're very small text, unfortunately. I apologize about that. But it shows different playgrounds. And that's something I want to close with, actually. If I go back to the demo environment, I give you a link to the OpenAPI playground up here at the top of the file. Let me show you this briefly. This is at platform.openai.com/playground. Again, you sign in. This you can use for free. You don't have to have a GPT Plus account. And what this interface allows you to do, it's not the most user-friendly interface, but you can actually go over here and you can work with the different models directly. So you can test out various subtypes of, for instance, GPT-3, as you can see. DaVinci is the main generally available one that's out in the wild, but there's Curie and Babbage and Ada. You can work on codecs using the DaVinci, which is the latest and greatest, or the Cushman, which is a smaller, looks like a faster, slightly smaller one. So you can interact and send in prompts and get responses here using any combination of those models. And there's some controls where you can do some additional customization. So that's a pretty cool site. This platform.openai.com, in my opinion, is the best source of truth for the OpenAI stuff. Like I said, there is documentation. It's not particularly robust, but it's quite good. As far as understanding more about the API, there's a separate doc library here. There's a collection of examples just to give you ideas of things that you can use these services for. And then, as you can see, there's Playground. There's a link to upgrade to ChatGPT Plus, and there's also onboarding if you want to start paying for access to the API. You can do that as well. Awesome sauce. Well, let me come back here. I think that's about it. The rest of it is just stuff I've already talked about, but the numbers I would trust in the PowerPoint before what I told you. For example, I think I might have erroneously said that GitHub Copilot is $20 USD a month. Looks like it's $10 a month or $100 for a year. You may qualify for free use. If you have active GitHub open source repos, they may throw you a license for free. Or if you're an educator, for example, that kind of stuff. Here's the list of the ID integrations. NeoVim is one I forgot about. So JetBrains, Visual Studio, VS Code, and NeoVim are the supported IDEs. We've already talked about that. So in summary, let me just say again that this is an exciting time to get into these services because we're on the front end of it. And I submit that by mastering this stuff and getting on board with it now, you're going a long way to future-proof your career as a cloud professional. And I mentioned that prompt engineering, if you find that you're especially good at it, you could carve out a nice industry niche for you. So again, the session materials are timw.info/chatgpt. My Twitter is TechTrainerTim. It's been my pleasure to be with you. I love talking shop. Questions, comments, concerns? Let me hand the baton back to you, Bill.
Okay, well, there were no questions in the chat, so obviously everybody's absorbed all the material.
I hope so. Fall back on that recording, everybody. I tend to teach in a very dense way, so you might find the recording can help.
Either they've gotten it all or they're stunned.
You're right, right.
Let me stop the recording, okay, just in case anybody wants to say anything. Okay.
And a silence falls over the room.
Okay.
Everybody doing okay, I hope? Having a good evening? Or morning, if you're in Australia.
Yeah, we only lost a couple of people from, which is another good sign at the end,
They were already trained data scientists. They had nothing to learn.
Yeah.
I'm furiously trying to figure out how to stop my screen share. Zoom has done this thing with their app now where they've removed most of their app Chrome, so I can't see the controls.
Should be at the bottom. Well, you should be able to open the bar. No?
I'm trying. And also, could you unmute Jeff? Because Jeff has his hand up.
Okay, sure. Let me unmute Jeff. How do I do that? Let's see. I don't see how to do that. Jeff, can you unmute yourself?
I can now. Thank you.
Oh, good. Okay.
First off, thanks for the presentation. It's been, as I'm a student at NSS here in Nashville on their software engineering track, and I've been very curious about how kind of a starting basis point, and I appreciate you putting this together for us. I do have two quick questions. When you were asking ChatGPT to compare an Azure product versus a comparable AWS or other vendor, do you see any slant in the response given, the funding for Microsoft, or is it fairly impartial? I mean, being new, I don't know, but I thought I'd ask an expert.
Yeah, no, it's a legit question. I have not seen it skewed. And a matter of fact, I can say this with pride and gratitude, that of the three major cloud vendors, Microsoft has a really robust support for AWS and Google Cloud. They've got guidance, not just for going from there to Azure, but from Azure to there. And that's something I submit you will not find if you go to AWS. They act like Azure doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Also, I want to say that both OpenAI and Microsoft are very vocal about the responsible AI principles, and one of those is equity and fairness. So the only thing that makes me cock my eyebrow a little bit is the fact that I've seen it give information about Microsoft stuff that's really current. But if you ask it about like, what's the latest Apple Watch, it says, as of September 2021, I don't know. So I think there is a little bit of capitalism going on there, but anyway.
Okay.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
And then one additional follow-up question. In the, I believe it was the sandbox, you were kind of showing how you can have your own instance of one of the AIs. And I know we've seen some bleed through from codecs generating plain language text, and also we've seen the opposite with ChatGPT generating code. You know, are you confident that any data in your private instance of the AI would not bleed through to a bigger scale?
That's again a good legit question. I don't know the answer. I don't know what the deal is. I haven't kicked the tires enough myself with OpenAI service. And like I mentioned, OpenAI themselves are pretty tight-lipped about the interrelationship between those different models. There obviously has to be some overlap, because you saw that we had the text model generating code and the code model generating text. I don't know how that's going to look in the Azure OpenAI service. If you brought up a Codex instance, a private